And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Welcome to the Politics, Prepping, and Paranormal Podcast.
Flippity jibbity nonsense.
I thought it was terrific.
It's not just big, it's yeah.
Let's go.
Welcome and thanks for listening to the Politics, Prepping, and Paranormal Podcast. My name is Jeff Morey and I'm your host. This week I couldn't resist but to cover probably the biggest and most polarizing topic in the political world, and for many in the country right now, the Epstein list. This subject is sending shockwaves through most all of America, especially for those who follow politics even in the slightest. Even within MAGA, I've personally witnessed many that are turning on President Trump in defiance of his current stance and statements regarding the release, or should I say the sealing and suppression, of the Epstein Files. I've commented many times on my social media about the Epstein Files being the one and only thing that 99% of Americans agree on. We want to see them released. Well, unless you're one of the famous people whose name is on the list, of course. So, as I'm also a major advocate for the release of the files, the American public deserves to know. But since it is and has been my personal belief that we'll never see them released, I've spent some time doing some digging and research into Jeffrey Epstein and his client list, as well as some of the popular and more fringe theories surrounding Jeffrey Epstein, that island, his death, and why they haven't been released. So buckle up. It's going to get deep. But before I talk about it, let's talk about some of the other big news stories this week. In world news, Syria and Israel have agreed to a ceasefire, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey said on Friday. This comes after Israel launched airstrikes at Syria on Wednesday, which Israel claims were aimed at protecting an Arab religious minority called the Druze. Hopefully everyone in the Middle East will follow suit and they'll all quit attacking each other and won't have to keep hearing about the continued violence all the time. The IRS issued a major win for religious liberty this week. Pastors can now speak openly from the pulpit about political candidates without jeopardizing their church's tax-exempt status. The IRS clarified that good faith endorsements from the pulpit don't count as intervening in elections, effectively loosening the old Johnson Amendment rules. President Trump called this terrific, saying it honors the First Amendment and respects spiritual leaders. Religious conservatives see this as a restoration of an important freedom. This week, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a major crypto regulation bill that's shaking up the financial world. In a 232 to 192 vote, lawmakers approved the Crypto Clarity Act, which aims to clearly define which digital assets are considered securities and which are commodities. This is huge because for years the crypto industry has been stuck in the legal gray zone, especially when it comes to the SEC and how they regulate things like Bitcoin and newer altcoins. Supporters say this bill will give investors confidence and allow innovation to flourish in the U.S., while critics warn it could favor big players and shut out smaller startups. The bill still needs to pass the Senate, but it's one of the most significant federal moves on crypto regulation to date. Also in Congress, lawmakers passed a rescissions package to pull back roughly $9 billion in public broadcasting and foreign aid funding. This marks the first time in decades a president's rescission request has moved this far. The bill passed on a 216 to 213 vote in the House, with only Republicans Mike Turner and Brian Fitzpatrick siding with Democrats in opposing the package. And the final vote in the Senate was 51-48, with only Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski joining with Senate Democrats in opposition. Remember these names, people. These are the same members of Congress that continue to oppose President Trump and the America First agenda. Remember these names when you head out to vote in the next round of elections and get these rhinos out of office. Anyways, this was significant because it finally cut funding for NPR and PBS, which had become nothing but liberal mouthpieces at this point. Some progress in the culture wars this week. Congress passed the One Big Beautiful Bill, which includes $40 million to launch the National Garden of American Heroes. This new sculpture park planned near Mount Rushmore will feature 250 statues honoring America's greatest patriots, thinkers, and heroes. It's a bold cultural restoration celebrating biblical values and American pride for the 250th anniversary of our nation. And in my final story that leads up perfectly to this week's topic, Maureen Comey, whose father is former FBI Director James Comey, was dismissed on Wednesday from her position as an assistant U.S. attorney in Manhattan. You may remember her as the lead prosecutor in the Sean Diddy Combs case, as well as, you guessed it, also the prosecutor in Ghislaine Maxwell case, and of course was involved in prosecuting none other than Jeffrey Epstein. President Trump reportedly was not happy with having a Coney working in his administration. Okay, that's all the non-Epstein list other news this week. Now let's get into it. But before I start talking about this subject, I need to first provide a little legal disclaimer here. The following content is for informational and commentary purposes only. While I discuss Jeffrey Epstein and individuals associated with his known social or business circles, I am not making any claims or accusations of criminal conduct unless such conduct has been officially documented or educated. All opinions expressed are those of myself, the host, and do not necessarily reflect facts or conclusions. Everyone mentioned is presumed innocent unless proven otherwise in a court of law. I encourage listeners to do their own research and form their own conclusions. Okay, now that that's out of the way, I guess the first thing we need to do is start at the beginning with how Jeffrey Epstein became known worldwide and how he supposedly made his money. I say supposedly because one of the popular theories is that he never really had a fortune, as well as a little about what we know about his background. Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born on January 20th, 1953 in New York City. He grew up in a seaside gated neighborhood at the far western end of Coney Island at the southwestern tip of Brooklyn called Seagate. I think it's interesting to note that Seagate is directly across from the ritzy and influential Atlantic Yacht Club, to which many prominent politicians and celebrities have frequented, and some of the wealthy families that own property now or in the past include the Morgan, Dodge, and Vanderbilts. Epstein began his professional career as a teacher at Dalton School, an Ivy League prep school, as a teacher, yet he possessed no college degree of any kind. Dalton is home to many of the sons and daughters of New York City's elite. And some of the people you know that are famous alumni include Claire Danes, Anderson Cooper, and Sean Lennon. He only taught there for 2 years before he was dismissed in 1976, supposedly because of poor performance as a math and physics teacher. It has been reported that some students during this time noticed and reported Epstein's behavior during his time at Dalton, claiming that he showed persistent attention towards teenage girls and even attended parties where his students were drinking. It is from here where Epstein was able to begin manipulating people and expanding his influence, after he wooed the father of one of his former students, who is an executive at Bear Stearns Investment Bank in New York. And the bank hired him as a junior assistant to a stock exchange floor trader. It wasn't long before he became an options trader and eventually a limited partner by 1980. Many people don't know that in 1981, Epstein's very first criminal investigation would take place, as he was investigated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as Bear Stearns, for possible insider trading surrounding an offer made by world famous Canadian spirits dealer Seagram Company. During his deposition with the SEC, Epstein also revealed that he had been charged with a crime in Great Britain, saying that he bought an antique sword and he got in trouble for carrying it, and he was told he had to ship it out of the country. Although I have not been able to find any evidence or records to support this story personally. Following his resignation from Bear Stearns in 1981, Epstein would found his own consulting firm, International Assets Group, which assisted clients in recovering stolen money from fraudulent lawyers and brokers, and he described himself as a high-level bounty hunter. Without spending the next hour talking about all those businesses, investments, and connections he forged, let's just say he spent nearly the next quarter of a century building his wealth and working with many of the world's rich and elite. And I have no doubt engaging in plenty of illegal and criminal activities, as well as molesting and doing God knows what to innocent girls along the way. So that brings us to 2005. This is when the news first broke that Palm Beach, Florida officials began investigating Epstein following a report from the family of a 14-year-old girl who came to them with allegations that she was molested at his mansion. This, of course, sparked the broader investigation into his life and revelations about all the other underage girls, many of which were high school students, that Epstein had allegedly paid to give him massages that would then escalate into sexual encounters. After police would search his mansion, they would find numerous hidden cameras and photos of girls throughout the house. But local authorities suspect that Epstein was tipped off about the search on his home and that several computers were missing, which potentially contained child pornography. On December 19, 2005, Jeffrey Epstein would hire famed Harvard law professor and attorney Alan Dershowitz. Does that name sound familiar? It should. He was O.J. Simpson's defense attorney. He hired him to head up his defense along with a dream team of defense attorneys, including Kenneth Starr and Gerald Lefcourt. Finally, in May of 2006, Palm Beach police would charge him with several counts of unlawful sex with a minor. And here is where the controversy, questions, and conspiracy theories would first begin. In what is still considered a highly unusual and controversial move, County Prosecutor Barry Krischer decided to send the case to a grand jury instead of directly filing the charges himself. So what makes this so unusual? Well, grand juries are usually used in Florida for murder cases or more complex investigations rather than sex crimes. In addition to that, sending the case to a grand jury makes it hard for the public, or anyone else outside the court system for that matter, to get any information, since grand jury proceedings are inherently secretive. So to me, it's very clear that Krischer was contacted very early by some very influential people that told him to handle it in the way that would draw the least amount of attention and also get the lowest possible sentence. Well, it worked. The grand jury only heard testimony from one accuser and indicted Epstein with only one count of solicitation of prostitution. The generic charge the same as if he had done it with a legal adult. But some people, such as Palm Beach Police Chief Michael Ryder and Detective Joseph Riccari, who actually led the investigation and interviewed many of the alleged victims, publicly questioned the findings of the grand jury, and Ryder would even say that the Epstein case was, quote, the worst failure of the criminal justice system in modern times. I think he nailed it back then and possibly still may be correct today. The Miami Herald released a report that Epstein had hired private investigators to intimidate the Palm Beach police officers, as well as the families of victims that were investigating the case. And officers claimed that they, at the time, recommended charges that could have, and probably should have, led to a sentence of up to 75 years in prison. But here is where it gets really interesting. For almost 2 years, Epstein's legal team would negotiate with federal prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami about a plea bargain that would allow him to avoid a federal prosecution. You might know the name of that particular U.S. attorney at the time, Alexander Acosta. The same Alexander Acosta who would later serve as President Trump's Secretary of Labor during his first term from 2017 to 2019. He would eventually resign his position as the Labor Secretary in July of 2019 for, you guessed it, criticism and speculation of his role in handling of the Jeffrey Epstein case, which to me was the beginning of the cover-up to Epstein's ties to Epstein's much more prominent associates, who we will discuss more in detail soon. Well, as if the 2006 charge against Epstein wasn't shocking enough, in June of 2008, Jeffrey Epstein would plead guilty to state charges. Yes, I said that right. State charges, not federal charges. Of one count of soliciting prostitution and one count of soliciting prostitution from someone under the age of 18. He's sentenced to 18 months in jail. And I have no doubt that plenty of calls from some of Epstein's prominent associates would help manifest what would happen next. Under the terms of the plea deal, the U.S. Attorney's Office would agree not to prosecute Epstein for federal crimes and enter into a non-prosecution agreement, or NPA, that would not only exempt Epstein from being prosecuted for future federal crimes, it also exempted 4 named co-conspirators, as well as any potential co-conspirators in the state of Florida. Many called it the deal of the century. Now, that in the state of Florida part would prove to be important soon. But after all the dust settled and the deal was signed, Epstein is sentenced to only 18 months in jail and is even allowed to leave prison for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week on work release, and only have to return at night. He, of course, was put in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Jail, and one woman even said that she was flown in to have sex with him in his office during his so-called incarceration in prison. Then, in 2009, Epstein is released from jail, so to speak, to spend a year on house arrest. But he's allowed to travel frequently, such as to his private island in the Virgin Islands, so long as he is back within 24 hours. Multiple violations are reported to have been recorded during this time, but of course, no one does anything about it. That now brings us to 2019. Remember a few minutes ago when I said that condition of his NPA in Florida only would prove to be important? Well, in 2019, it does. New York prosecutors would arrest Epstein at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey on July 6, 2019, and charge him with 2 counts of sex trafficking. Teterboro Airport, by the way, was reportedly Epstein's hub of his global sex trafficking network. And it has been said that his planes recorded at least 730 flights to and from Teterboro between 1995 to 2013. And now we come to the end of the Jeffrey Epstein story. Awaiting trial for his crimes in New York on August 20th, 2019, guards find Jeffrey Epstein dead in his jail cell. The official story is he killed himself by hanging. Okay. I know this is an audio podcast, but please raise your hand if literally anyone believes this. Yeah, me either. The New York medical examiner at the time backed up the official statement released to the public, but according to multiple forensic experts who researched the case, the hyoid bone, which is one of the broken bones reported in his autopsy and is a horseshoe-shaped bone in the front of the neck below the lower jaw, can be broken from hanging, but is more frequently associated with strangulation than hanging. So that's irregularity number one. Irregularity number two is the video footage released by the FBI, which reportedly is missing approximately 2 minutes and 53 seconds from, quote, stitched together clips. And that's not from me, by the way. You can find this info all over the internet. Irregularity number three is statements made by U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi about a nightly system reset that add further questions and speculation. The statements were about a reported 1 minute missing in the footage that has been acknowledged by both Bondi and the FBI. Irregularity number four is statements from former mob boss and Epstein cellmate Michael Francesi on News Nation when he said, quote, I spent 7 months on that tier and in those cells. And the first thing I have to say, there's no way you're able to commit suicide. I'll comment on my thoughts on his supposed suicide in a bit, but let's get into the part we all want to know. The powerful and influential people that control world governments, finance, retail, travel, media, movies, and influence people in civilization all over the world that are on the iconic Epstein list. There are supposedly hundreds and potentially even thousands of names of influential people that were either clients of Jeffrey Epstein or that he had dealings with and were in the same circles, so to speak, as Epstein was. In December of 2023, a federal judge ordered the unsealing of a trove of court documents that would reveal the names of many of Epstein's clients and associates. In January of 2024, about 950 pages of court documents identifying associates, and I'm just going to say associates and point out there is no legal proof any of these people took part in any criminal activities. They were merely associated with Epstein, either by spending time with him or visiting Little St. James. Associates of Jeffrey Epstein were released to the public, and in February of 2025, the Department of Justice released even more files to select conservative influencers, who in turn released more names and information, including flight logs from some of the passengers who flew in one of his planes. So, that being said, between 2024 and early this year, these are the names of some of the people known to have associated with Jeffrey Epstein. And I'm sure most of you have heard most of these already. Former President Bill Clinton, British Royal Prince Andrew, and I'm just going to name the big names that most people would probably have heard of. There are too many to list out them all, and many more that are still yet to be identified. Billionaire Bill Gates, French modeling agent Jean-Luc Brunel, former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, billionaire Leslie Wexner, actor Bruce Willis, actress Cameron Diaz, actress Kate Blanchett, actor Kevin Spacey, actress Naomi Campbell, actor Leonardo DiCaprio, Epstein's former attorney Alan Dershowitz, and yes, Donald Trump's name is reported to be listed as well. It's well known that Trump knew Epstein very well, and he was frequently photographed along Epstein many years ago. Like I said, that's a sample of who we know thus far. There are far many more that still have yet to be released. So that brings us to the final segment of this show and this topic in mid-July 2025. This month, President Trump has stirred controversy by dismissing the renewed interest in the Jeffrey Epstein case as a hoax and scam, urging MAGA supporters to drop the issue. Despite that, Trump later directed Attorney General Pam Bondi to ask the courts to unseal all pertinent grand jury testimony related to Epstein, though he emphasizes up to the courts to approve. Trump also denied writing a 2003 birthday note to Epstein, calling it a fake and threatening to sue the Wall Street Journal for publishing it. The DOJ under Bondi previously released a memo saying there is no Epstein client list, reaffirmed that Epstein died by suicide, and stated no further documents would be released, citing victim privacy. After facing backlash from the MAGA base and some Republicans, Bondi tweeted that the DOJ is now ready to move the court to unseal the grand jury records. And on Friday, the DOJ has formally asked a federal judge to unseal Epstein-related grand jury testimony. Meanwhile, internal tensions within the DOJ and FBI are growing, especially between Bondi and Deputy Director Dan Bongino, amid recent unconfirmed reports that Bongino was considering resigning over his disgust with the handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files. On Capitol Hill, MAGA-aligned Republicans have blocked efforts to force file releases, even as conservative voices and some Democrats push for transparency. Senator Ron Wyden revealed that the Treasury holds a massive trove of Epstein-related financial records worth over $1 billion and is demanding their release. The Epstein files have now become a political firestorm, igniting what some are calling a MAGA revolt over broken promises and unanswered questions. And I truly believe this is the one issue that literally 98% of the people on both sides of the aisle agree on. So why haven't the files been released? Will they ever be released? Personally, I don't think so. I have my theory, which I'll share with you in a few minutes, but before I do, let's explore a couple of the other theories floating around out there and see what you think about all of them. The diehard MAGA folks who think Trump walks on water and does no wrong think that all the developments regarding the Epstein files is just a psyop, and that this is all part of a grander plan to go after the deep state and is all, quote, part of the plan. You'll frequently hear them reference white hats and black hats and sixth-generation warfare. Well, I agree sixth-generation warfare and information warfare in general is definitely a thing. These same people will refuse to admit that Trump had a very, very long-standing relationship with Epstein. While I am, of course, not accusing Trump of any wrongdoing, I'm just pointing that out. A lot of these same people and others claim that Jeffrey Epstein is actually alive and that he's being held somewhere secure, waiting for the right time to be revealed to the world and come out and testify against all the evil criminal people on the Epstein list. And that in an ultimate good versus evil showdown, the white hats led by Trump will ultimately prevail and defeat the deep state. There are a lot of theories going around that Jeffrey Epstein's body was actually switched with that of Hillary Clinton's brother, who actually died around the same time as did Jeffrey Epstein. I know I'm diving pretty deep down the rabbit hole right now, but believe me, people actually believe that. Another theory going around, of course, the predominant one with Democrats, is that Trump is actually guilty of visiting Epstein Island, had sex with underage girls, and is going to pardon Ghislaine Maxwell eventually, and that the whole thing will never come to light and be swept under the rug. Alex Jones has said he believes that Trump has made a clandestine deal with the deep state, and that they have agreed that if Trump kept the Epstein files sealed and buried the truth, that they would allow him to continue with his America First agenda unchecked. And then there are those that believe that the entire Epstein files is just a hoax and they never truly existed at all. I saw an interview with a guy who used to know Epstein where he said that he believes that Epstein was just a construct, so to speak, and that Epstein, although a real man, was literally, for lack of a better description, designed by all these wealthy, influential people as a fall guy, and that he was never truly as rich and powerful as people say, and that he was just kind of created as the head of this sex trafficking scheme, literally to be the fall guy in the face of someone everyone can blame, and that they could kill him off to hopefully make everything go away. Yeah, I know that one's pretty far out there too. So do you want to know what I think? I think the Alex Jones theory, while not nearly as intricate and theatrical as what he makes it out to be, is probably closest to the truth. I think that President Trump, who I hope isn't involved, has way too many ties politically, financially, and personally to the people who are actually on the list. I don't think he went and met with leaders of the New World Order in some dark room in a hidden basement somewhere and signed a clandestine agreement with them that he could push forward his America First agenda if he would bury the files. But I do think he's been contacted by countless powerful people on that list. And he has some deep ties to it himself. Again, not accusing him of anything, just guilty by association. That he doesn't want to come out. And how do world leaders and politicians survive? Through money and support. And even when you're the most powerful man in the world, supposedly, even Donald Trump still needs money and support. So that's it. That's my theory. Sorry if it isn't dark, theatrical, and glamorous. I just think it's the most likely. And well, I hope we'll one day eventually see the Epstein Files, and even more than that, that these sick people that are guilty of heinous crimes against underage girls are finally brought to justice. And I think that's the one thing folks on both sides of the aisle can come together and agree on. All right. That's my show for this week. Thanks as always for listening. Please be sure to like and follow me on all my social media, X, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Blue Sky, or you can email me at thepppodcast@yahoo.com. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Politics, Prepping, and Paranormal Podcast. Your source for real news and analysis on politics, prepping, paranormal, conspiracy theories, and the volatile state of the world we live in. Tune in next week and every week for a new episode, and stay safe, stay healthy, and stay vigilant.